Picture this. You are standing on a tiny, wind-swept speck of volcanic rock in the absolute middle of nowhere. To the east, the coast of South America is over 2,000 miles away. To the west, the nearest inhabited island is another tiny speck, well over 1,000 miles across the deep, dark Pacific Ocean. This is Rapa Nui, more commonly known to the rest of the world as Easter Island. As you stand on this grassy, treeless shore, you listen to waves crash against the cliffs. You aren't looking out at the ocean. You are looking up. Staring down at you is a colossal face carved from solid volcanic ash. Its jaw is sharp and its brow is heavy. Its expression is unreadable, and it weighs roughly the same as 3 fully grown elephants. Now, look down the coast. There isn't just one of these faces. There are hundreds of them. Welcome to one of the most enduring, fascinating, and wildly misunderstood puzzles in human history. Today, we are going to figure out exactly how an ancient, highly isolated group of humans managed to carve, transport, and perfectly erect nearly 1,000 of these massive stone giants. And they did it completely alone. They had no wheels, no metal tools, no cranes, and not a single draft animal like a horse or an ox to help pull the weight. Grab a snack and settle in, because the real answer to this ancient mystery is far more brilliant and far more human than any wild internet conspiracy theory. To really grasp the magnitude of what the ancient Rapa Nui people accomplished, we have to travel back to the year 1722. A Dutch explorer named Jacob Roggeveen drops anchor off the coast of the island on Easter Sunday. When he and his crew row ashore, they are utterly baffled by what they see. They find a landscape entirely devoid of large trees, inhabited by a small population of Polynesians, living a relatively simple Stone Age existence. Yet, lining the coasts are these monolithic stone statues, called Moai, resting upon massive stone platforms called ahu. Some of these statues are over 30 feet tall and weigh upwards of 80 tons. Roggeveen wrote in his logs that he simply could not comprehend it. How could a people without thick timber for sleds, without strong ropes, and without complex machinery hoist such unfathomable weight into the sky? The confusion was so great that for centuries European explorers and early historians assumed there must be a missing piece to the puzzle. Some lost advanced civilization must have built them before vanishing into the sea. But the truth is, the ancestors of the very people Roggeveen met were the master architects. The story of the Moai begins around the year 1200 AD, when a group of Polynesian wayfinders navigated the treacherous Pacific in double-hulled canoes and landed on Rapa Nui. They brought with them a tradition of carving stone to honor their deified ancestors. But on this specific island, that tradition exploded into an absolute obsession. To see where this obsession took shape, we have to walk inland to a volcanic crater called Rongorongo. If you visit Rongorongo today, you are stepping into an ancient factory frozen in time. This crater provided the perfect medium for carving, a type of compressed volcanic ash called tuff. It's a stone that is surprisingly soft when it's still in the bedrock, but hardens into an incredibly durable material once exposed to the air. Imagine the scene here at the height of the island's culture. The slopes of the volcano are swarming with master carvers. They aren't using steel chisels. They are using handheld basalt stones called toki. They are rhythmically chipping at the bedrock day after day, month after month. They would carve the statues face up, right into the slope of the mountain. We know exactly how they did it. Nearly 400 Moai still sit in this quarry today, in various stages of completion. Some are just rough outlines sketched into the rock. Others are completely finished, just waiting to be detached from their rocky spines. And there is a haunting detail about these statues in the quarry. If you look closely at their faces, their eye sockets are completely flat. They are blind. The Rapa Nui carvers deliberately left the eyes uncarved while the statue was in transit. The eyes, made of bright white coral and red scoria stone, were only placed into the sockets once the statue was finally erected on its platform, miles away on the coast. Only then were their eyes opened. Only then did they inherit their spiritual power, their mana, to watch over the villages. But cutting a 50-ton block of stone out of a volcano is only step one. Once they chipped away the spine connecting the statue to the bedrock, they had to slide this gargantuan, fragile piece of art down a steep, rocky slope. The challenge was to do so without snapping its neck. And then, they faced the ultimate engineering nightmare. How do you move a stone giant across miles of uneven, hilly volcanic terrain to the edge of the sea? For decades, the greatest minds in archaeology looked at this impossible logistical nightmare and applied a very traditional, very Western mindset to solving it. They assumed that to move a colossal, heavy object, you have to lay it down flat. Think about how we are taught the ancient Egyptians moved massive blocks for the pyramids. You strap the stone to a wooden sled, lay down a track of rolling logs, and get hundreds of people to pull it with thick ropes. It's all about horizontal brute force. In the mid-20th century, the famous Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl even tested this exact method on Easter Island. He gathered a large group of locals, tied thick ropes to a medium-sized moai, and literally dragged it face up across the dirt on a wooden sledge. It was painfully slow and back-breakingly exhausting. The sheer friction damaged the statue, but it proved a point. With enough muscle, enough rope, and enough wood, it was physically possible to drag a giant. But this log-rolling idea helped give rise to one of the most damaging narratives in modern historical science. Remember how I mentioned the island was a treeless, grassy landscape when the first European ships arrived? Well, core samples taken from the mud deep inside the island's crater lakes revealed a shocking truth. Rapa Nui wasn't always a barren rock. It used to be covered in a lush, dense forest of giant palm trees. So, where did all the trees go? For a long time, the prevailing scientific consensus was a horrifying concept called ecocide. Popularized by modern historians, this ecocide story went like this. The islanders became so obsessed with building bigger, heavier, and more elaborate moai that they engaged in a destructive, island-wide arms race. Rival clans chopped down the giant palms to make wooden rollers, levers, and sleds to transport their towering statues. They kept cutting and cutting, blinded by their religious fervor, until one day, the very last tree fell. Without trees, they couldn't build canoes to fish in the deep ocean. Without tree roots to hold the earth together, the topsoil blew away, destroying their sweet potato crops. According to this theory, the ecosystem completely collapsed, leading to mass starvation, violent tribal warfare, and the destruction of their own society. It is a gripping story, a perfect, tragic cautionary tale about human greed and environmental destruction. It's the kind of story that gets repeated in documentaries and textbooks around the world. There is just one massive problem with it. The physical evidence left on the island doesn't actually support it. To see why the log-rolling theory falls apart, we have to look closely at the ancient dirt roads leading out of the Rano-Raraku quarry. Along these winding paths, there are dozens of abandoned moai scattered in the grass. If they were being transported horizontally, on wooden sleds, you would expect to find them lying flat on their backs, perhaps with remnants of crushed wood beneath them, abandoned whenever a sled broke. But that is not what we see at all. The abandoned statues along the roads are found in very specific, highly unusual positions. The moai that were abandoned on uphill slopes are almost entirely lying flat on their faces. The ones left on downhill slopes are lying on their backs. And many of them are completely shattered, snapped clean in half right at the neck or the waist. If you are carefully rolling a sacred 50-ton statue on a flat log track, why would it violently snap in half in the middle of the road? And why would they fall in such predictable, specific directions, depending on the incline of the hill? These aren't the remnants of a careful, horizontal sled hauling operation. These are the remains of giants that tripped, fell over, and shattered. To figure out how a school bus-sized rock can trip and fall over, scientists had to stop looking at European engineering manuals. They had to start listening to the local Rapa Nui people. Because for generations, the islanders had been telling anyone who would listen exactly how the statues were moved. The outsiders just refused to believe them. When anthropologists first asked the Rapa Nui elders how their ancestors moved mountains of stone, the answer was always the same. It was delivered with absolute, unwavering certainty. The statues walked. According to the island's rich oral tradition, the moai didn't need to be dragged by miserable, exhausted workers. They were imbued with a powerful spiritual energy called mana. This vital force was channeled by great chiefs or powerful priests. It allowed the massive stone giants to stand upright, animate themselves, and waddle across the island at night to reach their coastal platforms. For well over a century, Western scientists essentially patted the islanders on the head and wrote this off as a charming primitive myth. After all, rocks don't walk. Magic isn't real. To the European mind, there simply had to be a practical brute force explanation involving heavy sleds, thousands of laborers, and, as we discussed, the tragic clear-cutting of entire forests. But as we just saw, that brute force sled theory left a trail of physical evidence that made absolutely no sense. If a statue was strapped flat to a log sled, a broken rope might cause it to slide back down a hill. It wouldn't cause it to violently pitch forward and shatter its own face into the dirt. It wasn't until a new generation of archaeologists finally decided to actually listen to the Rapa Nui people that the pieces of the puzzle clicked together. What if the folklore wasn't a magical fairy tale cooked up to explain the unexplainable? What if the statues walked was a perfectly accurate, literal description of an ancient engineering technique passed down through generations? Think about how you move a heavy refrigerator across your kitchen when you are entirely by yourself. You don't tip it onto its back, lay it on a bunch of broomsticks, and try to drag it across the linoleum. That would ruin your floor, and you probably wouldn't even be able to push it. Instead, you walk it. You tilt the fridge slightly onto one edge, pivot the opposite corner forward, and then lean it the other way to pivot the next corner. Tilt, twist, step. Tilt, twist, step. You shimmy it. By rhythmically shifting the center of gravity from side to side, you can move an incredibly heavy, upright object across a room using surprisingly little effort. Now, I want you to scale that kitchen refrigerator up to the size of a 3-story building, weighing up to 80 tons. Suddenly, the shattered statues littering the ancient, winding dirt roads of Easter Island make perfect, logical sense. These giants weren't being dragged flat. They were standing up. They were being walked vertically. When you are walking a massive, top-heavy stone up a steep volcanic hill, the rope crew must keep their rhythm and balance. If they lose it, the statue tips forward and falls flat on its face. If you are carefully walking it down a steep decline and gravity gets away from you, it tips backward, falling flat on its back. And because it's falling from a towering standing height of 20 or 30 feet, the sheer kinetic impact of hitting the hard earth snaps the relatively thin neck right off. The abandoned Moai weren't dropped off broken wooden sleds. They were giants that had literally tripped and fallen on their long walk to the sea. This realization was a major shift in how archaeologists thought. It completely erased the need for hundreds of wooden log rollers, immediately pulling a huge foundational pillar out from under the whole ecocide and societal collapse theory. They didn't need to chop down every tree on the island to move the Moai, because they weren't using rolling logs at all. But having a theory that a statue could walk is one thing. Actually proving it is another entirely. Because if you look closely at a Moai, it isn't shaped like a boxy refrigerator at all. For a stone of that magnitude, to walk without immediately crushing the people guiding it, it can't just be a heavy block. It has to be engineered, from the very first strike of the chisel, to possess a highly specific, impossibly complex center of gravity. The ancient Rapa Nui weren't just talented artists honoring their ancestors. They were master physicists. And to prove it, modern scientists were going to have to figure out how to bring a giant back to life. To understand just how brilliant these ancient engineers were, look at the very bottom of a Moai designed for transport. If you slice a Moai in half horizontally and look at it from the top down, the base isn't a square, and it isn't a perfect circle. It is shaped exactly like a capital letter D. The flat, straight part of the D is the statue's back, and the heavily curved, massive part is its large, protruding belly. This is not an artistic accident. By making the belly stick out so far, the carvers intentionally shifted the statue's center of gravity forward. Furthermore, the base itself wasn't carved perfectly flat against the ground. It was angled slightly downward at the front. When you stand a Moai up on this uniquely angled, D-shaped base, it naturally wants to lean forward. It sits right on the terrifying tipping point of falling flat on its face. All it takes is the absolute slightest pull, and the statue practically falls right into its next step. In the year 2011, archaeologists Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo decided to put this ancient physics equation to the ultimate test. They commissioned a highly accurate, 5-ton, 10-foot-tall concrete replica of a moai. They brought it to a grassy field, stood it upright, and tied just 3 thick ropes to its head. One rope went to the left, one went to the right, and one stretched straight backward behind the statue. They didn't use a massive army of miserable laborers. They used just 18 people. The team on the left would pull, tilting the D-shaped base onto its curved edge, and the giant would pivot forward. Then, the team on the right would pull, pivoting the opposite edge forward. The small team in the back held the third rope tight, acting as a human brake to keep the incredibly top-heavy statue from pitching too far forward and smashing into the grass. Left, right, with a rhythmic chant and surprisingly little physical exertion, the 5-ton stone giant came alive. It leaned back, rocked side to side, and gracefully waddled across the grass. It didn't just move. It quite literally looked like it was walking. When you watch footage of this real-world experiment, it sends a shiver down your spine. Suddenly, the ancient oral traditions of the Rapa Nui make perfect, chilling sense. The priests or chiefs weren't using magical spells. They were coordinating a system of tension and gravity that moved the statues. The mana, that spiritual life force the islanders spoke of, was actually the collective rhythm of the community, pulling in perfect unison. A handful of skilled workers could walk a 5-ton statue 100 yards in less than an hour. But solving the mystery of the walk only leads us to an even more dizzying question. Because walking the giant out to the coastline is only the first phase of the operation. Once a moai successfully reached its coastal platform, it had to be levered up onto the stones. And for many of the most important statues on the island, the ancient Rapa Nui weren't finished yet. They had to give the giant its hat. Many of the largest moai are crowned with massive cylinders of bright red scoria stone called pukau. These red cylinders are meant to represent the top knots of hair traditionally worn by the island's chiefs. Some of these solid stone hats weigh up to 12 tons. They are the size of 2 cars stacked on top of each other, and somehow they sat perfectly balanced on the heads of statues nearly 30 feet in the air. How on earth do you lift a 12-ton stone cylinder 3 stories into the sky without a modern crane? Once again, early European explorers assumed impossible ramps, millions of hours of brute labor, or lost technologies. But the answer, much like the walking moai, is a clever use of basic physics. It relies on a mechanical advantage technique called parbuckling. Imagine trying to roll a heavy barrel of water up a steep driveway. If you just get behind it and push, it's exhausting, and if your hands slip, the barrel rolls backward and crushes you. But if you securely anchor a long rope at the top of the driveway, run it down and wrap it around the barrel. Then walk back up, pull the rope, and the barrel begins to roll. The rope acts as a makeshift pulley system. You cut the required pulling force roughly in half. The barrel acts as its own wheel, rolling up the incline as you pull from the safety of the top. Archaeological evidence suggests the Rapa Nui built gently sloping ramps of earth and stone, leading right up to the top of the moai's head. They carved the giant red hats into perfect, wheel-like cylinders. They wrapped thick ropes, woven from tough tree bark, around those cylinders. Then, standing at the top of the ramp, a small team of workers simply rolled the massive hats right up the statue's back. Once it reached the top, they tipped it 90 degrees, snapping it perfectly onto a specially carved peg on the statue's head to lock it in place. Finally, they dismantled the dirt ramp, leaving a seemingly impossible, gravity-defying monument standing alone against the sky. This is the real turning point in the Easter Island story. Every single time we assume these ancient people were primitive, brute force laborers who relied on destruction to achieve their goals, we are proven completely wrong by their sheer, elegant genius. If rhythmic walking and clever parbuckling meant the Rapa Nui didn't need to chop down millions of logs, another question remains. What happened to the island's lush palm forests? What actually happened to the lush, dense palm forests of Easter Island? If the people didn't cut them all down in a mad, obsessive rush to build statues, why was the island a barren grassland when the Europeans arrived? The answer doesn't involve human greed, but it does involve a stowaway. When those very first Polynesian wayfinders dragged their canoes onto the shores of Rapa Nui around the year 1200, they didn't just bring stone chisels and sweet potatoes. Hiding deep in the hulls of their boats was the Pacific rat. To a rat, Easter Island was an absolute paradise. There were no natural predators, no snakes, no large birds of prey, and a practically infinite buffet of massive, nutrient-rich palm nuts falling from the trees. The rat population exploded into the millions. We know this because archaeologists have uncovered thousands of ancient fossilized palm nuts in the soil, and nearly every single one of them has tiny rat teeth marks gnawed right through the shell. The islanders certainly cut down some trees for canoes and fires, but it was the rats that sealed the forest's fate. By eating all the seeds, the rats completely stopped the forest from regenerating. The old trees eventually died of old age, and no new trees could grow to replace them. According to the old ecocide theory, this loss of the forest should have been the end of the Rapa Nui. Without tree roots to anchor the topsoil, the harsh Pacific winds began blowing the nutrient-rich dirt straight into the ocean. The island was slowly turning into an infertile desert, but it wasn't, because the Rapa Nui didn't give up, and they didn't starve. Instead, they executed one of the most brilliant agricultural pivots in human history. When they realized the soil was drying out and blowing away, they looked at the only abundant resource they had left: volcanic rock. Millions of chunks of broken, porous volcanic rock covered the island. The farmers began gathering these stones and physically hauling them to their fields. They cracked them open and laid thousands of tons of rock fragments directly over the soil, creating massive, intricate rock gardens. To a European explorer looking quickly, it just looked like a wasteland of scattered stones. But modern agronomists realized this was a highly advanced technique called lithic mulching. By covering the ground with rocks, the Rapa Nui trapped the morning dew, preventing the sun from evaporating the precious moisture in the soil. The heavy rocks shielded the dirt from the brutal ocean winds, stopping erosion in its tracks. And incredibly, as the porous volcanic rocks slowly weathered in the rain, they acted as a slow-release fertilizer, leaching essential minerals back into the dying earth. Because of this grueling, back-breaking innovation, they were able to grow massive yields of sweet potatoes and taro in an environment that should have been completely dead. They didn't collapse in a furious, starving civil war. They survived. In fact, they thrived. When the first Dutch ships arrived, the island was home to thousands of healthy, well-fed people living in a stable, deeply spiritual society. The true, heartbreaking collapse of Rapa Nui didn't happen because of environmental hubris. It happened decades after European contact. In the 19th century, brutal Peruvian slave raids captured a huge percentage of the island's population, including the chiefs and the elders who held the oral histories. The ships brought smallpox and tuberculosis, diseases the islanders had no immunity against. In a matter of a few tragic years, the population plummeted from thousands to barely more than 100 individuals. The real tragedy of Easter Island wasn't an internal failure of the people. It was the sudden, devastating arrival of the outside world that nearly erased their incredible legacy. When we look back at the towering faces of the Moai today, we shouldn't see a cautionary tale of a doomed, reckless society that destroyed its own home. We should see the exact opposite. Easter Island is the ultimate monument to human resilience. It is a story of a deeply isolated people who used stone, applied physics, and a strict collective effort to make giants walk. When the environment turned against them, they didn't panic. They engineered ways to draw life from dead rock. It makes you wonder, if a completely isolated society could innovate their way out of total environmental collapse using nothing but stones and ingenuity, what could we accomplish today with the technology we have at our fingertips? Thank you so much for exploring this ancient mystery with me. If this changed how you see Easter Island, please hit like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend who loves history. Drop a comment below and let me know, what ancient human mystery should we explain next? Keep wondering, keep exploring, and I'll see you in the next one. Even with the brilliance of lithic mulching and the truth of the walking statues finally understood, modern science wasn't quite done with Rapa Nui. While the stone giants tell the island's engineering story, an entirely different mystery was hiding in the soil the island farmers worked to save. And this mystery fundamentally changes how we view ancient human travel. Remember the sweet potato? The crop that saved the Rapa Nui from starvation? For a long time, botanists were deeply confused by its presence on Easter Island. The sweet potato is not native to the Pacific Islands. It is entirely native to South America. So how did a South American root vegetable end up in the middle of the ocean, centuries before European galleons started sailing the globe? For decades, scholars thought a seed pod might have drifted on ocean currents, or a bird carried it across thousands of miles of salt water. But recent breakthroughs in DNA sequencing have completely shattered that theory. Geneticists analyzed ancient oceanic sweet potatoes and compared them with DNA from modern Polynesians. The results were staggering. Long before Christopher Columbus was even born, these ancient Pacific wayfinders did the impossible. They didn't just sail to Rapa Nui and stop, they kept going. They navigated thousands of miles of open ocean and landed on the coast of South America. There they traded with indigenous peoples, picked up the sweet potato, and sailed back. They were among the greatest sailors of the ancient world, crossing an ocean that covers a third of the Earth's surface, using the stars, ocean swells, and birds for navigation. But their genius wasn't just limited to navigating the stars or walking 80-ton statues. They also achieved something that only a handful of civilizations in the entire history of the human race have ever managed to do. They invented their own, completely independent system of writing. It is called Rongorongo. In the late 1800s, a local missionary noticed that several wooden tablets in the islanders' homes were covered in densely packed, intricately carved symbols. These weren't just decorative pictures. They were lines of heavily structured text, featuring glyphs of animals, plants, and geometric shapes. To this day, Rongorongo remains one of the greatest holy grails in linguistics. It is completely undeciphered. During the slave raids of the 1860s, the elders, priests, and scholars who could read the tablets were often the first to be taken or killed. The key to the language was completely wiped out in a matter of months. Today, only 24 authentic Rongorongo artifacts remain in the entire world, leaving us to only imagine what lost histories, scientific observations, or ancient poetry are locked inside those pieces of driftwood. Today, Rapa Nui is stepping into a brand new era of discovery. Using modern LIDAR technology, which is essentially shooting lasers from the sky to map the ground beneath the grass, archaeologists are scanning the entire island. And what they are finding is overturning old population estimates. The intricate networks of rock gardens and agricultural terraces were vastly larger and far more complex than we ever realized. This island didn't just support a struggling, starving few thousand people. At its height, this meticulously engineered landscape could have supported nearly 20,000 healthy, thriving people, all working in tandem with the earth rather than destroying it. Yet, the Moai now face a threat that no amount of ancient engineering can fix. As global temperatures rise and the ice caps melt, the Pacific Ocean is slowly creeping higher. Many of the most iconic Ahu platforms were built right on the coastline. Today, the crashing waves are eroding the ancient dirt and rock foundations faster than ever before. After surviving centuries of isolation, changing climates, and the catastrophic arrival of the outside world, the stone giants are now in very real danger of tumbling into the sea. Archaeologists and the modern Rapa Nui people are in a literal race against time, building seawalls and documenting every inch of the coastline before the ocean reclaims its greatest mystery. When you look at the whole picture, from the walking statues to the star-guided voyages, from the invention of a lost written language to the brilliant rock gardens, the myth of the reckless, tree-destroying islanders completely evaporates. The story of Easter Island is not a dark warning about human beings destroying their own environment out of greed. It is a shining, enduring testament to human adaptability. It is proof that when faced with impossible odds, starvation, and isolation, human beings don't just roll over and give up. We innovate, we build, we channel our collective rhythm, and we make the impossible walk. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the true history of Rapa Nui. If this journey changed the way you view the ancient world, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who loves a good historical mystery. Let me know in the comments below. If you could instantly decipher one ancient language, would it be Rongorongo or something else? Keep questioning the past, keep exploring, and I'll see you in the next one.